Hey, well, what's up, guys? Welcome back to The Collision. Daniel here to talk about the latest entry in the MCU, The Marvels. Just hit theaters. I've seen it, so let's talk about it. So it seems in recent days, there's definitely been a lot of chatter on the old internet and just sort of out there in culture concerning sort of the fate of the MCU and just a lot of either doom and gloom or just concerns or just debate about it. And The Marvels in particular is a movie that seems to have just generated a lot of buzz, not all of it necessarily positive buzz, but just a lot of discussion, a lot of questions going into this movie. But now that I've seen it, we can cut right to the chase and just get into it. Is The Marvels a good movie? No, it is not. This is not a great movie. We'll kind of get into some of that. Kind of at the same time, though, is it the sort of unadulterated, just complete disaster that a lot of the online buzz seem to frame it as, leading up to the movie? No, I don't think it's necessarily that bad. This isn't a completely awful movie. It's not the same as it's not like borderline unwatchable like some of the more recent MCU movies like Thor: Love and Thunder or Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania. Like it's not that bad. Although I do think this clearly belongs in the bottom tier, sort of in the MCU pantheon. And the issue with The Marvels is not that it's just objectionably terrible, but just that it's so completely empty and hollow. It really doesn't offer much beyond just sort of, hey, more MCU content. And at this point, I just don't think that is enough to satisfy viewers kind of beyond just the most die-hard and kind of devoted Marvel fans. And in many ways, The Marvels feels a lot like sort of this convergence of all the bad and kind of all the worst tendencies that have sort of derailed the MCU in recent years. This movie spends so much time kind of picking up the baton of previous stories, reminding you what came before, and then sort of arranging the game pieces on the board to set up future stories in that just never gets around to telling all that compelling of a story in the present. Yes, there are some entertaining action scenes. There's the expected Marvel jokes. There's kind of glossy spectacle and CGI and visuals. But I mostly just sort of left the theater wondering what was the point of any of this? What was this isn't a movie that's really not about anything other than just Marvel itself. So one of the kind of the gimmicks in this movie is this sort of mechanic that the three sort of main characters, the Marvels, that whenever they use their powers, at least initially, they swap places with each other. And the idea itself is actually really fun. It does result in some kind of enjoyable action scenes and just some clever ideas with how they utilize that. But I think it also is a very sort of fitting metaphor for the film itself. This movie feels like it was created by a committee, and a committee that really couldn't agree on what kind of story they wanted to tell. There's sort of this various discordant pieces that all feel kind of grafted together to pad out the runtime, but you never get a sense of any real cohesion in the storytelling. And one of the biggest areas where you see sort of that competing visions is just with the tone, because the tone in this movie is all over the map. Sometimes it plays itself sort of as more serious drama, but then other times it veers into very over-the-top, spoofy kind of territory. The film, for one extended scene, becomes a musical, and all the characters are singing for some reason. I guess because that's supposed to be funny. The scene just does not work. Another scene involving some kind of alien cats on a spaceship feels very much like it's like an outtake from one of the Guardians of the Galaxy movies. It is kind of an amusing scene. It just feels very out of place in the context of the film itself. There are entire subplots in this that feel completely inconsequential and really don't impact the story at all. It almost feels like it was left over from an earlier draft of the script. And even Captain Marvel herself, her personality seems to fluctuate and change from scene to scene and sort of how she's characterized. And this feels like this isn't necessarily a movie that lacks vision. It's just a movie that lacks any kind of direction to commit to any one of its many competing visions. But for me, the main problem in this movie is just that it doesn't give audiences enough reason to actually care about the characters and the events that are taking place on screen beyond just sort of assuming a pre-existing attachment to this overall unfolding Marvel story. I know a lot of people on the internet have very strong opinions about Brie Larson as an actress. Personally, I'm somewhat agnostic towards her. I do think she is a talented actress, Although I still, even after a couple movies and appearances, I'm still struggling to put my finger on exactly who Captain Marvel is as a character. Like, what are her defining character traits? What is her sort of struggle that's driving her forward? She's just sort of there. Like, as an audience, you root for her because she's the protagonist and you're sort of supposed to root for her. But the story itself labors to give you any real reasons or to invest or to sort of get to know who she is sort of deep down as a character. And like a lot of Marvel movies, the villain suffers a very similar fate. I think she's fine. She's okay, but she's just totally forgettable. Unlike Captain Marvel, she is given some clear, like you do know what her objective is and what her motivation is. But the character herself really isn't developed as like a person beyond just someone that wants to accomplish those goals. But I will say, sort of the one exception in this movie that does sort of pierce through this my overall apathy towards what was happening is Iman Vellani as Miss Marvel, because she is a total delight in this. I never did get around to watching the Miss Marvel show, but from seeing this movie, it's clear to see why she's become such a fan favorite. She just has vibrant energy. She has a lot of charisma, but even beyond that, her character is kind of refreshingly grounded and relatable. She's not just sort of another superpowered person that's involved in some cosmic multiverse story, but she's a young girl. She has big dreams. She has a family. She has like personal attachments that actually sort of tether her to Earth and give a connection point for me to actually understand who she is as a character beyond just being one more hero in the, kind of the Marvel universe. As far as content to consider, kind of things going on the surface of this film, there's actually not a whole lot. Language, there is a fair amount of profanity, mostly beginning with the letter S. And there's also kind of frequent uses of OMG. Miss Marvel, in particular, uses that phrase quite often. So there is there, but no F-bombs. And really, I don't find the amount of language just sort of over the top, about standard what you would expect from a Marvel movie. Violence, again, also expected from a Marvel movie. There's not a blood or gore or anything, just sort of standard comic book action fare. The actual like death count in this film is probably quite high because the villain is kind of destroying planets and some of that, but you don't actually see the actual individual deaths depicted on screen. So not much there. Sexuality, nothing really as far as sexuality goes beyond an alien cat that is shown kind of defiantly licking itself between its legs, but no other sort of sexuality in this film. And maybe kind of the only other kind of content thing, as a Christian at least, to consider is that Miss Marvel's family is Muslim. It's sort of a traditional Muslim family. And there is a scene where, sort of, when facing a very near death experience, her brother begins to sort of pray, sort of like an Arabic prayer. And Samuel L. Jackson kind of interrupts him, saying, hey, are you praying? And then says, don't stop. We need all the prayer you can get. And he starts sort of saying amen and adding his own prayers. Again, I didn't find that necessarily offensive or anything that's consistent with the character, but there is sort of that instance of maybe some spirituality. As far as like themes and worldview, things going on beneath the surface of this film, there's kind of a recurrent motif of just this idea of like names and identity and kind of how the name reflects either accurately or falsely sort of who you are as a person. And it is like, names are in the Bible, characters often have their names changed to reflect sort of the new purpose that God has on their life, like Abraham and Peter having their name changed. And in the Marvels, there is this sense like the name is intertwined with the identity. And you kind of see that in various ways. Captain Rambeau is sort of the third Marvel in this, and she doesn't have a code name. She doesn't really have a superhero name. And kind of all throughout this film, the other characters are trying to brainstorm like what her name could be and to reflect who she is. And they never do end up kind of landing on a superhero name. And there is sort of a sense that she hasn't kind of yet earned her hero's name, that sort of by adopting this persona as a hero before she's sort of lived out her life as a hero is sort of this empty gesture. But the theme is probably the most clear with Captain Marvel as a character and how she sort of wrestles with the names that she's being given. Because on one side, Miss Marvel very much idolizes sort of from afar Captain Marvel and even adopts the name to reflect who she thinks she is. And because she sort of holds her in such like a lofty light, she struggles to see sort of Carol Danvers, like the human beyond the persona. And then kind of from the other side, the the villains in the story refer to Captain Marvel as the Annihilator because some of the unintended consequences of some earlier actions that were kind of devastating to to them and to their people. And Captain Marvel, that sort of is her struggle throughout this film, is sort of like which of these names that are used to describe her reflects her true identity. Is she the Annihilator? Is she sort of this lofty, elevated Captain Marvel that some other people have attributed to her? And kind of where this movie ultimately lands with some of this, with some of that tension, is that it's our actions that ultimately define us, and our names sort of reflect who we are, rather than just labels that people put on us that determine our destiny. I think as Christians, there's definitely stuff in there. Thinking even just Matthew 7, sort of known by our fruit, that it is your actions that will ultimately kind of give the truth about which labels accurately describe it. So again, I don't think the movie itself necessarily goes as deep into that as it could have, but there's definitely some stuff there. So in the end, I don't think this movie does anything to change sort of some of the unfavorable narratives that have been developing towards the MCU. I'll admit there are moments to enjoy. I didn't hate this film as much as maybe I thought I would going in. There's some fun action scenes. There's some humor that does land, a lot of humor that doesn't. But there's some funny jokes. I do think maybe die-hard Marvel fans will enjoy some like the hints about where this bigger story is going and some stuff that's foreshadowed. And hey, if you're just someone that just wants to see a bunch of superpowered women punch a bunch of bad guy goons into the horizon, I think there is something to scratch that itch, even if you're not going to get a whole lot of depth beyond that. But at least for me personally, this is another another tick in the side of the argument that the MCU has overstayed its welcome, or at least that it's testing sort of the limits of what it can be, and it does need to course correct and change in some way. I don't necessarily think this movie is an awful movie. It's just a very empty movie, a very kind of boring movie, and in some ways that's almost a worse fate. But hey, let me know what you guys think. If you guys saw this movie, if you love the MCU, if you're tired of the MCU, or you just want to see a superhero movie, we'd love to hear if this movie worked with you, if you enjoyed some of the humor, or like me, you maybe found all the different tones just sort of giving you whiplash and having a hard time investing in sort of the emotional stakes of this film, kind of lost in all the spectacle. We'd love to have a conversation with you about that. And if you haven't done so, I encourage you guys, subscribe to the channel, become a Collider. We'd love to have you be a part of all the things that we do here. But most of all, guys, thanks for watching, stay safe, and continue to collide with your world for Christ.